So I'm Robert Evans from Argent, and I'm sitting here with Jeremy Collins. Jeremy Collins has had a lot of experience in retail and has presented a paper at the conference called Retail Therapy, How Did We Get Here? And his paper builds on the experience in the public and the private sector over 35 years, working in Wirral Borough Council, for example, but also for many years at John Lewis and now at Fenwick department stores. Jeremy, John Lewis and Fenwick's very different businesses. How is Fenwick's going to survive and grow and thrive in this very difficult, challenging retail environment?
There are two ways to approach the current challenge. John Lewis were very brave and innovative in acquiring an online business 18 years ago and really took the bull by the horns and tackled the challenge coming from the new online pure plays up front. Fenwick adopted a rather more cautious approach, stuck to their tried and tested model of running department stores, but are now looking to develop an online business with the advantage of learning from everybody else. So my sense is that Fenwick will reinvent itself partly by redefining what an online service would look like, and by continuing our historic strategy of providing a very locally tailored service. We only have 9 department stores, and I think increasingly that's an advantage. But it means that we can continue to be the heartbeat of that community, and we're looking at a whole range of initiatives to strengthen our connections with those communities, not just as a retailer, but as a business and as a part of those communities.
So in the conference today, we heard from not just yourself, but we also heard from Terry Farrell, and we also heard from Joe Negrini, and it seemed to me that all of you touched on the issue of civic leadership, the importance of civic leadership in making places successful and retail as part of those places. What do you think that really means in practice? What does good civic leadership from your experience look like? And are there any examples of where that's really influenced investment decisions that you've been involved with?
So my sense is that across the country, leadership, and particularly amongst local authorities, has become increasingly inconsistent. There are some outstanding examples, and perhaps Manchester would be a very obvious one to state. And what Sir Richard Lees and Howard Bernstein between them have achieved is quite remarkable. And it's born out of a very clear vision for their city, a very clear balance of responsibilities between responsibility for strategy with Richard Lees and the responsibility for implementation with Howard, but both having the ability to understand and inform and shape that strategic thinking along the way. There are other places where I fear the local authority is simply either caught up in or sees its role solely as being one of an administrator, and as a consequence those places tend to have lost their way. So my sense is that in times when there is such profound change either happening or immediately ahead of us, that leaders have to come to the forefront. And in my presentation I used an image of Churchill, and I used it inspired having seen the film His Darkest Hour, that actually it was his ability to not just galvanise a nation, but actually listen to people first in shaping his ideas and shaping his vision and sense of direction that then inspired everybody else to follow. And I think we need to get back to that role. Let's establish a really clear purpose for our towns, cities and communities that is relevant to them, not simply a cut and paste from somewhere else. Get back to creating places with a really clear sense of identity, a really clear sense of purpose, and then create a framework in which we can encourage investment and development to happen.
So Jeremy, one of the other themes perhaps at the conference today was the issue of consolidation. It was touched on in different ways. Within the retail sector, you were making it very clear that, in your view, we just can't go on as we are with every operator having their own logistics network, their own distribution hubs, that ultimately profitability is going to require them to work together. And actually that was touched on in other spheres today as well. What will that mean for high streets and the land use planning system? How is that going to impact on how our places feel? Presumably less white vans, but are there any other changes that we might see?
There are probably two strands to that, I think, Robert. Firstly, I think there are areas where more efficient use of services and economies of scale will help free up financial resources to put back into better quality services, for example. And so it makes sense where local authorities can consolidate their administrative functions to gain benefit of those economies of scale and free up the frontline troops. You see it across retail businesses. Fenwick are going through the change at the moment and looking to consolidate functions from across the 9 department stores into central functions to be more efficient and more effective, and that frees up money to invest back in the stores. I think when it comes to consolidation of use of space, my sense is it will ultimately slow down the rate at which we see the growth of distribution space. But I think it will also help to work out how to efficiently deliver product. But in terms of fulfillment, the challenge is always the last mile. How do you get the product ultimately to the customer at the point where the customer wants to collect it? It's, as you rightly point out, not sustainable for all these half-empty white vans to be hurtling around our towns and cities. The air pollution issues that were very capably raised by Katie in her presentation have to be tackled. And I think we need to think about how local authorities and retail and distribution industries come together to find a solution to all of this before any sort of legislation might emerge to regulate it.
And at the start of your talk, I teased you with a graph of the announcement yesterday by John Lewis about its profits. There's an interesting quote on the BBC website about that. It says, "Make no mistake, for the high street, this is as significant as the fall of the Roman Empire. And much like the fall of Rome, it is not just the empire that suffers. The infrastructure that supplies it will too. The UK industry must steel itself for dark times to rise again." Overblown or a fair assessment, do you think?
I think it's a very fair assessment. I am confident that John Lewis Partnership will ride this storm and will continue to act with sort of vigour and courage to redefine its proposition to a point where it's sustained and profitable again. I think for some retailers, sadly, they will go to the wall, and we've seen a lot of the older businesses fall that way. But there will be new entrants, and the most remarkable example is probably Apple, and what they are now achieving in mainstream physical retail is remarkable. And I'm sure there will be other organisations and businesses that will emerge. I think we'll see a lot more opportunity for small independent businesses to re-establish themselves. And in my entire career, there has always been a debate about how to break the sameness that was appearing in the offer of retail fascias in our towns and cities. And now the market forces are simply dictating that will happen and repricing real estate, I suspect, to enable it to happen. So we're in for a lot of dynamic change. It's how we are flexible, or how we create flexibility to adapt.
So finally, optimistic or pessimistic?
Oh, absolutely optimistic. Always optimistic.
Jeremy Collins, thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert.